we're going to talk quite a bit about not only hurricanes and emergency preparedness, but specifically our area and why we in Southwest Florida and in Sarasota County are so susceptible to the risks and the hazards from these large storms. So my name is Sandra Tapfumaneyi. I have the pleasure of being the Chief of Emergency Management for the county. And I've been here for a year and a half. I was formerly the chief of Lee County, an hour and a half south of here, and was down with their team for about 11 years. And I was the chief during Hurricane Ian, which was the storm that was supposed to hit here, by the way. And instead it went the hour and a half south. 15 feet of catastrophic storm surge that hit down in that area. And so a year and a half ago when I stepped into the role here, the county really wanted to make sure that we were all prepared for a more catastrophic impact. And so we worked very hard the first 6 months that I started with all the partners and the team that we have at the county, all the municipalities. And so we were in a good place when we started the season. We were not expecting it to be as busy as it was, but certainly we learned a lot of very valuable lessons, and we'll talk about that today. One thing just to stress, because we're here to talk about hurricanes, it's a good thing that we are wanting to know about that, but just keep in mind that we have other hazards that can also impact our community. And this is since 1953, we've had 48 federally declared disasters in Sarasota County. Now, the majority of them, it might be hard to read, but this column over here all the way to the left is the number 23 tropical storms. That we have more tropical storms than we do anything else, so we focus heavily on that. But it could be wildfires, it could be tornadoes. A couple of days ago, we held a terrorism exercise to make sure that we're ready for those kinds of events. So we plan for everything, but we are focused on the tropical systems because that's what's most likely to impact us. Now, the way that the system works in the United States is that disasters begin and end locally. So what does that mean? That means that we have things in place to respond to and recover from emergencies. If it goes beyond our local capabilities, we have the opportunity to ask the state for assistance. And then if the state can help us, and they do, they're tremendous assets and they have a lot of resources for us, but if they need additional help, then they go up to the federal level or they'll ask another state to come in to assist. And we certainly saw that this last season. We had thousands of people that came in to assist us with the response to the hurricanes. The other thing is that we at the county level are responsible for coordinating with all of the municipalities. So we have 4 municipalities in the county, Venice being one of them. And Venice has their own emergency operations center and emergency management team. When they need things in order to respond at the city level, they will submit those requests to us at the state or at the county level. Our job is to make sure we are representing the whole county, including all of the municipalities. It's per state statute, every county has to have an emergency operations center and at least a chief. Here in Sarasota County, we have 7 people on our county team, so we're fortunate to have a pretty robust team. There's a lot of changes that we are looking out for potentially coming. I'm sure you've heard with potential changes to FEMA. There's a lot of uncertainty right now. The one thing I can share with you is that as they push potentially more responsibility to the state level and the local level, the good thing is that the state of Florida, we have a very robust and strong team here. Good news is that we're good at it. The bad news is it's because we activate a lot and we have a lot of practice, right? But that is good news for us. And so if we need to end up going that route where it's going to be pushed more to the state level, I'm confident that we'll work with our state partners in Tallahassee in order to still deliver services. This is our Emergency Operations Center. It is for the county. It is up off of Cattleman Road between Fruitville Road and Bee Ridge Road. This building houses the 911 center for the sheriff's office. It also houses the 311 center. So 311 is there. You can dial anytime to get information about services from the county or if you have questions about some resources that you might need. During a disaster, the 311 center turns into our emergency hotline. So if you do have questions about evacuating or open evacuation centers, or you want to report information to us, then you can call 311 and they will help you with getting that information. And in emergency management, in addition to coordinating the response, what we do from that building in the EOC, we make sure that we are sending information with a clear message. We want to make sure that it's vetted information to the best of our ability, that we're giving you good information. And so we have a whole team that is there that is coordinating all of the information and resources and getting that out into the community. Venice is very good at forwarding that information on and working with our public information officers. And so the information you're getting from them, you can guarantee that they have worked with our team here at the Emergency Operations Center. And we'll talk about some other areas you can go for information here in a little bit. The other things that we're doing, we are making decisions on evacuations. We're opening up mass care services that might include evacuation centers and points of distribution for food and water after the disaster. And we're bringing in resources. Resources can be very scarce when we have a large spread disaster. And so one of our roles is to make sure that we're getting damage information in order to understand who needs the resources the most. So if we are scarce, we can make sure we're getting that out to the people that need it the most. And we're understanding maybe how, as we get more resources in, where we can deliver those. We work very closely with many state agencies. This is not an all-encompassed list. It just has a few. Our Division of Emergency Management is that group up at the Tallahassee State Emergency Operations Center. They help us. They are our liaison with FEMA. They help us with all of our resource requests that we might need. Our Department of Military Affairs, for example, they're the ones that help us coordinate the National Guard if we need them to come in to assist with security or with staffing or points of distribution. Department of Children and Families, they're there to help us get resources and funding out for people that lose food during the event. So there's a number of different agencies. So again, a very robust structure that we have here in the state. So what we're going to do now is we're going to shift to talking more specifically about the last season. It was very active. We're going to show a short video that highlights some of the key points.
Our tropical storm Debbie slowly making its way up the East Coast, dropping record rain. Homes in Sarasota still underwater.
Essentially, we've had twice the amount of rain that was predicted for us to have. We have had numerous streets that are flooded.
With a record-breaking 10 to 17 inches of rain there.
Helene, one of the largest storms in the last couple decades. At least 246 people have died, and now what is the deadliest hurricane to hit the mainland since Katrina.
We issued evacuation orders for Level A, mobile and manufactured homes, as well as anybody living on a boat.
The raw power of a storm like Hurricane Helene.
Now, residents have started the cleanup process, but they've stopped while waiting to see the impacts from Hurricane Milton.
From one hurricane and now another monster storm barreling towards them.
2 back-to-back hurricanes.
Urgency as Floridians prepare for the second major hurricane to strike the state in just 2 weeks.
Many people worried that Milton would bring more of the same.
Level A, Level B, Level C, if you live in a mobile and manufactured home anywhere in the county, as well as those that live on boats. It's critical that you leave if you are in any of those areas.
Just hours away from being possibly the most powerful storm to hit the area in 100 years.
This is the worst structural damage that we have seen and experienced with our own eyes.
They're saying it's one of the biggest ever recorded on record.
The residents who I've been speaking with today, they say they are scared, they are nervous because this storm just feels different.
They're physically tired, they're mentally exhausted from it, but again, incredibly resilient.
Emergency management, FDEM, and the state and the governor are fully leaning forward to supporting every resource request possible to get our communities back up and running.
Teams are working across the community to continue recovery efforts from Hurricane Milton.
The Florida National Guard has been with us, teams that have been out this morning clearing roads. We do have evacuation centers open, are working on providing some additional resources.
Points of distribution set up across the community from north to south.
Thank you to all of the responders, all of the teams that came in from across the state.
True public servants with heart. They're away from their friends and their family and cleaning up their yards, and they do whatever it takes.
All right, I like that video because I'm sorry if it was a little bit too much PTSD for you that were here last year. I know it's a lot, but maybe good for those who weren't here last year to kind of see what we went through. But it's also good to remember, you know, when you have these storms that are happening one right after the other, you kind of forget sometimes, okay, we went through a lot during a very short amount of time. And really showing that the disasters, for the most part, they bring out the best in our community. You know, we had not only this strong partnership at the governmental level, but also the nonprofit community, the private sector, our faith-based community. And so I just love highlighting some of that to show you some of the great stuff that was done last year. So let's talk a little bit. We're going to dive into each storm. Debbie was the first storm of the season. And, you know, we had just had a big rain event, but a couple of weeks prior to Debbie, where we had about 6 to 8 inches of rain that impacted the downtown Sarasota area mainly. And when we had Debbie that was coming, we were first given information from the National Weather Service that we could expect the same amount of rain. So at first we were said, well, that's a lot of rain, but I think we should be fine to be able to absorb that amount. And then as the storm got closer, the rainfall prediction started to increase. And but really the prediction was being pushed up and said, well, the landfall they knew was going to be somewhere north of us up in the Panhandle area, the Big Bend area, and they thought that that rainfall was going to be accumulating there. And then, you know, what we ended up seeing is that, in fact, Sarasota County and Manatee County got the most rainfall for the entire event across the state. It was just under 17 inches of rain in 48 hours. That is an incredible amount of rain. And actually, most of it fell really within 24 hours, that Sunday into Monday. And we woke up Monday and we were flooded. We had widespread flooding throughout the community. Now, the National Weather Service will tell you that this storm, with the rainfall, it was a less than 1% chance, really a 0.05% chance that that much rain was going to fall here in this area, which means that, you know, very, very small percent, less than 1 in a 100-year storm. And so for us, we immediately sprung into action. We had a search and rescue team that came up from Fort Myers area that joined our first responders, that we went door to door. There was 3 additional search and rescue teams that came in very quickly afterwards to offer people evacuation to an evacuation center. We had about 100 people that went to that location. And, you know, we had over 1,000 homes that were impacted, some of which had multiple feet of water in them. One of the really big lessons we learned is that this storm was over 100 miles off of the coast, and it was just a tropical storm. So I hope that you take the just out of your terminology when you talk about tropical storms, because yes, they are weaker in wind, but they still have tremendous impact potential. When you look at the radar of the storm as it was passing and paralleling us, the outer rain bands never left Sarasota and Manatee as it was passing us. So it was making landfall up in the Big Bend area, and it was still dumping rain on us that entire time. So very unusual to have this much rain, but that was the major impact for Debbie. We did open up a multi-agency resource center to give resources to the community that was impacted. We were declared federally, so FEMA came in to provide additional support. The big news for us there, it was very good in a sense that we had them already here in county, because then when Helene comes a couple weeks from now, we already have that resource secured, which other counties had a hard time getting up a disaster recovery center and getting FEMA in because it was so widespread. So we'll fast forward over to Helene. So Helene, September 26th, made impact. Now, this was a similar track from Debbie, 140 miles off coast. And this storm was more powerful. So we knew that the category, although it was a Category 1 wind, it was going to be more intense than tropical storms. We weren't quite as concerned about wind as we were with storm surge. So the forecast, because it was so big and powerful, it was paralleling up through the Gulf, and it was forecasted that we would get 5 to 7 feet of storm surge, which, you know, that's a significant amount of storm surge. So we called for a level A evacuation. We did end up seeing the 5 to 7 feet of storm surge, which was the most storm surge we have seen in Sarasota County in about 80 years, right? So it's been a long time since we've seen that much. Anybody here 80 years ago? No? Okay. So we had about $18 million of county public infrastructure repairs and emergency work. We had, roads that were washed out along Casey Key and some of the roads that are along the coastline. The big story was the sand also. So there was so much sand that the storm surge pushed in that you had to plow it. I'm from the Chicago area, so I'm used to growing up with the snow plows, right? That's what it reminded me of. It was you had to plow the sand out of the way, and we had these big sand banks along the edge here. So a lot of unique characteristics with this storm. We had 7,600 residents that were impacted with this event. And again, that storm surge. So we had people who didn't evacuate that were in their home when multiple feet of water, came in from that event. And in talking with them, had the opportunity to speak to some of the Siesta Key residents, and they said, "Oh, we would never stay again," right? Which, again, not 12 days later, we had now our massive storm, Milton, which was our landfalling storm. This was making a beeline right for our coast. And, we were very concerned for multiple reasons for Milton. This could have been a catastrophic impact to our county. The forecasts were calling for 10 to 12 feet of storm surge and even higher in some areas. And, for us, as we saw that storm surge forecast, we called an evacuation into level C. And we'll talk about the maps here in a minute and why we had to do that. But it was the largest evacuation we'd ever called. Now, the good news is that the large storm surge only manifested in a very small part of the county. So bad day for South Minnesota Key residents, but the rest of the area got about the same storm surge levels as Helene, about 5 to 7 feet. So that 10 to 12 feet was just concentrated, and it was really the direction that the storm came in that made all of the difference. Had it shifted just a little bit, we could have seen that forecasted storm surge push inland for multiple miles. And, I like to share with you because it's hard to sometimes grasp that concept of the storm surge pushing inland, and people ask, why did you call for such a large evacuation? Would that ever happen, right? I lived in Lee County during Ian, and my house was about 6 miles inland. We were in an elevated area, about 5 feet elevation and newer building code. And the storm surge, that 15 feet at the coast, pushed inland, and by the time it reached our neighborhood, it had decreased to about 5 feet. Well, the storm came to our front door. Everyone else in our neighborhood beyond that newer development was not elevated. They had the 5 feet into their homes. And that was 6 miles inland. So we live on a very vulnerable coastline, and that's why we have to call for these large evacuations. Again, it didn't happen in Milton because of the shift, and it downgraded. The storm weakened before it hit us and the angle it came in. I wish these storms were more predictable and we knew exactly what they were going to do. It would be so much easier to tell you exactly what was going to happen. That way you can protect yourself and your homes accordingly. But unfortunately, we don't have that good of a forecast, right? The National Hurricane Center does a really good job of telling us generally what's going to happen, and they've gotten more and more precise. But we do have to account for the possibilities of that risk. So again, for Milton, 9,500 homes damaged. Many of these homes were the same homes that were damaged for Helene. So we had damage on top of damage now. And this is $144 million. This is just for the county's estimates here, not also including the municipalities. So if we were to add Venice, and we were to add City of Sarasota and all the others, that number would be much higher. But just for the county to repair roads and to all the emergency protective measures, picking up debris, which we had 2.4 million cubic yards of debris, right now the estimates are at $144 million of cost for the disaster. And I'm going to go ahead, just because I want to kind of get to some time for questions here. We're going to just jump into talking a little bit more about hurricane season. And so hopefully you know the time frame. June 1st, a couple of days away, to November 30th. The most intense storms happen right in the middle, September, October time frame. And the forecast, I know if you're sticking around for Bob Harrigan, I'm sure he'll go over this in more detail. I like to just tell people we pay attention to the forecast. It is going to be another active season, at least that's what they're forecasting, maybe a little bit less active than last year. For us, it just takes one storm to come and make it a really bad day in our community. So, you pay attention to the forecast, but we don't change the way that we plan in any way. The National Hurricane Center has an experimental forecast cone that they implemented last year. And all that means is that you see the cone, but you see all that color on the outside of the cone? What they're trying to depict is the impacts that can happen outside the cone. The cone itself only tells you where the middle of the center of the storm will make landfall 2/3 of the time. That's really the only information it gives you. So they are adding this additional information about watches and warnings so that people will take that more seriously on the outskirts. This last year, we had a tremendous amount of tornadoes that happened outside of the cone of Milton and other parts of Florida, for example, so there could be other hazards. Categories are very important because they tell us how much wind we can expect. So Milton came in at a category 3. The thing that this doesn't tell us is how much storm surge is associated with the winds. So you can have a very, very strong storm, the very powerful winds, like a Charlie, which was a category 4, with very little storm surge because it was moving so fast. And then you can have a slower storm like Superstorm Sandy that was a 1 that brought 10 to 11 feet of storm surge because it was slow moving, so the winds were very slow and not as powerful winds, but because it was so large, it was able to push that water onto the land. So what I want you to take away from this, and I think I've got one more slide from the National Weather Service here, if you can read that, these are just different storms that have the different categories. And so Ike, for example, up top, is a category 2, and it had 20 feet of storm surge at a category 2, right? It's a lot of storm surge for a low number category. So just don't bank on the number of the category to be your driver for decision making on your protective actions on whether you're going to evacuate or not. It does talk about the wind, and don't get me wrong, if we have a 5, it's going to be a bad day for all of us, right? That's going to be a big storm either way. But it's not the whole story. So we talked about your evacuation levels. This is our website. The link is there, that scgov.net/be prepared. So if you're not familiar with your evacuation level, we encourage you to go there. Where you see the arrow, there is a Know Your Level button. The Know Your Level button is what you need to click on, and you can put your address in the top bar, and it will tell you exactly which evacuation level you live at. You can put any address that you want in the county, and it will give you that information. The other thing I'm going to point out before I go to the next slide here is the link right above it, where it says Emergency Preparedness Guide. We are in the process of printing out the 2025 guides. We tried to get them before this event, and we kind of ran into some challenges, so I apologize for that. But we will be posting, that's a link to the 2024 version. The 2025 version will be posted there in just a short time, and we'll have actual physical copies for you available too. It's available in English, Spanish, Ukrainian, and Russian. So let's talk about the levels. So this is the evacuation level map on the left, okay? As you can see, it's very large and very colorful. What does that mean? That means that almost all of the county is in an evacuation level. And there's storms out there that could potentially come and cover the area with water that is pushed up with these powerful storms. Is it going to be likely that we'll see a storm that's going to push storm surge on the other side of I-75? That's very unlikely. Could it happen? Yes, it could happen. I really hope I'm not in this job if that ever happens to us down here, and I hope you're not living here either at that time, but it's possible. So it's important to know where you live, what your zone is, so that when we call for the evacuation on the right, we change everything to red that needs to, every area that needs to evacuate. So that's the map we pushed out after we made the decision to call for levels A, B, and C. Because we know that there's not everybody that understands this map to the right in their planning process, so we want to make sure that they get the information and they understand when they need to evacuate. These are some new graphics that we're going to be showing this year, because this concept that I was describing to you about water being pushed up onto land is hard to wrap your brain around unless you actually have seen it before or you've seen water come up in your neighborhood. So here, if you can see the darker color up on the very top, this is actually an indication of up to 7 feet of storm surge, and it covers that level A. And so let me see if I have a pointer. I don't think the pointer, there we go. Okay, so right here, that dark color is going up through our level A. So when we had that 5 to 7 feet of storm surge for Helene, That's why we called for that level A evacuation. This up to 15 feet, we can see up to a level C. Now, the 15 feet starts over here at the coastline. As you go inland, you're not getting 15 feet all the way over to the sea. The sea is going to be more like 2 to 4 feet, right? And you might be elevated. You know, a lot of people like to tell me that, well, my house is elevated, I should be fine, right? And that may be the case, but you need to be careful because you could be isolated out there for a while or stranded, you know, in the flooded roads. For sure, you do not want to be staying in these like level A, level B would be very risky to stay put. And then this would be 20 feet of storm surge. 20 feet of storm surge, especially down in the Northport area and like parts of Venice, 20 feet could see water pushing all the way up into an E. So again, a rare situation, but that's what we are preparing for. So what can you do to be ready? So we want you to have an evacuation plan in place. My evacuation plan for my family is to jump right to sea. I send them across the state to a hotel on the other coast. Now this year I sent them to West Palm. And what happened in West Palm? That's where they got all the tornadoes over there, right? So it's not without risk of its own. But I knew that they would be safe from the storm surge and the power outages and everything that was happening on this side. You know, stay at home if you feel safe, and if you are not concerned about not having all of your amenities that you're used to, like power, right? If you're dependent on electricity, then you should, for your medical devices, for example, then you shouldn't be staying at a house unless you have a generator, and even generators can fail. So have a plan. We have people, you know, the first responders are not going to respond after about 45-mile-per-hour winds. So if you are wanting to have access to an ambulance to get to a hospital, then going another place that's not going to be impacted could also be another thing to think about. If family and friends outside of the evacuation level are a great place to go. We do have evacuation centers that we open. 12 of them are available for every hurricane. And we always get asked the question, why are we not using schools in Venice, right? And it's for that very reason that we were talking about for the evacuation levels. We do not want to put shelters and evacuation centers in areas that could be inundated with that storm surge. So we're moving them outward so that they're in a safer location. You don't need to pre-register for these unless you want a medically dependent shelter. Those are the ones that are for people who are on oxygen or have acute medical needs, where the oxygen or the power for that facility will be running because they have a generator there. You do need to pre-register, which you can call 311 or go to that same website, that scgov.net/beprepared. Okay, everybody should have a kit. Okay, whether you're going to evacuate or stay put, it's important because we don't want you to have to be out and about roaming around trying to find food and water after a disaster. There's debris on the ground, there's live wires, you know, just it's very dangerous. So be equipped if you're going to stay home to be self-sufficient really for 7 to 10 days. In that link I shared with you for our disaster guide, there is a checklist of items that we recommend. There's many here. Of course, water is very important. Somebody yesterday, I was at a seminar, and they recommended getting a liner for your bathtub that will preserve that water for drinking water. You know, non-perishable food and a can opener. So if I told you you're not allowed to use any of the food in your refrigerator or your freezer, right? How many days do you think you could survive? Somebody at a seminar the other day told me, I'm good for 3 months. You should see what my wife stocks up in our garage, right? I'm like, well, that's pretty good. I said, I don't think I'd make 3 months, right? But think through, like, see if you can start, you know, loading up some items. Medication, your first aid kits, anything that you might need. The NOAA weather radio is really important because if you lose connection with your cell phone or your TV is off, we'll be able to alert through NOAA weather radios. Those are really good to have. Just make sure that you program them ahead of time. And again, if you need any help with that, usually your fire department can help you with that, or you can call 311. Cash is good to have on hand too, because a lot of businesses won't have cash available, or won't have credit cards available if their power is not working, so you might need to use cash. And one last tip, flashlights are great, extra batteries. Don't use candles because they could turn into a fire, which is another situation you might not want to be dealing with in the middle of a disaster. But somebody recommended too having a headlamp so that you can wear the flashlight as you're going room to room instead of holding the flashlight. You know, lanterns are good. You can stick them in a room and they bright up the room. Insurance is key. This is a great time to check your insurance policies. Usually if a storm is coming or after 30 days of when you make the change, the company won't implement that change for 30 days. So this is a good time to check your insurance. Is it adequate coverage? Do you want to up it? And also flood insurance is something that we highly, highly recommend. This is something that we learned last year. A lot of people that were not in the flood zones were flooded. And so just because you are not required to have the flood insurance, it doesn't mean you shouldn't have it. If it rains at your house, it could flood at your house. So it's something to keep in mind. If you're evacuating, before you evacuate, turn everything off, including circuit breakers, gas up your vehicle. This time of year, you shouldn't really be below half tank in your vehicle. Bring in all your outdoor items. Shutters are good. Tape doesn't really help too much. So we encourage either using cardboard, or not cardboard, that's not gonna help much either. Plywood, or installing hurricane shutters is really the way to go. And then after the storm, there will be limited emergency services, like we mentioned. But if you need 911 during the storm, call 911. They will put your name on a list, and then they will get out to you as soon as possible afterwards. And they triage, so whoever has the most emergent need is going to get looked at first. There is a medical director for the county that is at that 911 center that will be helping to triage calls, or if you need to perform CPR, for example, they can talk you through that. The only death that we had of the 3 storms last year, a direct death, was somebody that drove through a flooded road on his way to work after Hurricane Debbie on Monday morning. So he got in the car, he drove over that flooded road area, was not realizing the power of the water as it was pushing across, and it picked up his car and put him into the canal. So please, please do not drive through flooded roads. Very, very dangerous. Try to stay off the roads if you can. I myself ran into some debris on my way home from the Emergency Operations Center, and I totaled my car after Milton, right? It was dark. I was trying to get home to see my husband that was at home, watching our cats, and I came right up on that debris, and it came fast because it was so dark, right? So be very, very careful driving around. If you don't need to be out, don't be driving around, and certainly don't be driving at night unless you absolutely have to be. And then we're going to talk about assistance here. So post-storm recovery resources, we have centers that we set up. In fact, the Venice Community Center was a disaster recovery center for a number of months. We do set up multi-agency resource centers if we don't get federally declared, which is just local resources that are there. Come and talk to FEMA and the Small Business Administration face-to-face. The Small Business Administration has very low interest loans for repairs to homes or for vehicles that you might lose, for example. And it's easier to talk to these individuals face to face than it is to try to do everything virtually. So take advantage when we have those centers. And then this is just my last slide, just information. I'm gonna keep this up with all of our, the 311, our county website, our social media. We put a lot of videos out during disasters so that we try to give you a daily update of what's going on. And Alert Sarasota is something, if you have not signed up for it yet, you go to alertsarasota.com, and you will see a link to be able to put in your address and tie it to your cell phone. So if we're doing alerts in that area, you will get that regardless if you're home or not. And it's a great tool. The city of Venice uses it as well. So I'm gonna pause there, and I know we have some microphones set up. There's one right here in the yellow. So if you guys have questions, I would love to take your questions.
Do the evacuation centers take pets?
They do. So all of them take pets. We do ask people to bring all the supplies that you need for your pets. So cages, food, kitty litter if it's a cat.
Right. Okay.
All of those. Yeah.
Are there any size restrictions?
No, as long as it can fit in a crate, like maybe like an airline crate would be, a large size. We do keep in mind too that the pets are separated into an area with all of the pets there, and so they're kept in the crates. You can go and check them out and play with them, visit with them, take them outside, but so that we want to make sure that they're at least comfortable in that size.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Good question.
Because I don't go anywhere without my dog.
Yeah, that's a really good point. If you're going to evacuate, please do not leave your animals at home, right? Take them with you. Take them with you. And if you're going to a hotel, a lot of hotels take pets now, so just call ahead and see if that's acceptable on that side. Okay, other questions? You guys have any other questions? Okay, you can shout. I'll have to repeat it because they're filming it, but go ahead. Sure.
So it's, we get a lot of evacuation notices. What isn't as clear is when it's safe to come back to your neighborhood, especially if there's debris. So how do we get that?
Yeah, good question. So the question is that we get a lot of evacuation notices, which makes me very happy. I'm glad you're getting those notices, so thanks for saying that. But not as many notices for when you can return, right? So returning is a little bit tricky, right? We don't necessarily issue an all clear ever from the county level because that could be dangerous. We've got people who can't return to their neighborhoods per se and may have issues. So here at the city level, I would recommend that you would, your city website, your city call center, however we can get through there, you can call there. You can try 311 also. And if you're not in the area because you have evacuated, I'm going to, actually, Leah, can you double check for me because I believe I'm going to give a number, but I want to make sure it's the right number. Can you double check? I know it ends in 5,000 and the first 3 digits are 941, but I want to double check. I think it's 861. We'll confirm for that. But it's a number you can call from out of the area, and they may be able to give you some information about damages. Typically, it takes a couple of days to go through and check on neighborhoods. We have damage assessment teams, as does the city, and they go through and they check all the damages. The only time we're going to cordon off a neighborhood and not let people in is if there's power lines down or we're doing search and rescue and people might be trapped in their homes, for example. So generally, if you give them a couple of days to clear debris off of roads, that's typically what it takes, unless we have a really widespread catastrophic event. Is that right? Was I right? Okay, so I'm going to give you that number again so you can write it down. So again, this is the 311 number if you're out of the area that you can call from long distance. It's 941-861-5000. I'll say it one more time. 941-861-5000. And actually, you don't have to be out of the area. You could make that phone call here locally, too. If 311 isn't, getting through, you can try that number as well. Okay. Oh, you have a question? Yep, go ahead. Mm-hmm.
I'm sorry if I'm sort of beating a dead horse, but...
That's okay. Go ahead.
You mentioned that Ian was a 3, and my memory is it was a 4.
It was a 4.
A lot of us thought that it was a 5. And the newspaper actually ran an article that those of us who stayed here thought it was a 5. And I mean, I know who makes that decision, but I think that makes a difference. And I'm just wondering how your agency deals with that, or if you can tell me how that all happened. Because it seems to me like insurance-wise, I know it made a big difference.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
So what your thoughts are about that?
Yeah. So the category, and if I said Ian was a 3, so Ian was a 4, right? Milton was a 3 for us when it hit. So if I said that incorrectly, I apologize. But now Ian was a 5 out in the Gulf. But what happens is that they may be a higher category as they're developing. And in our case from Milton, it was a 4 out, when it was developing out in the Gulf. But as it was coming in, it downgraded to a 3. The only thing that determines the category is the wind speed at a sustained 1 minute per hour time frame, okay? So at a minute interval, they need to have sustained wind to be able to say it is this wind speed. And they go with the highest recorded level. So there's that wind category that we talked about. I'll put it back up here real quick. There it is. So depending on what wind they record at that level, then they determine, and they being the National Hurricane Center, determines which category it is. And then they let us know. So our agency doesn't make that decision. That's a federal, National Hurricane Center decision.
recently said something about no chemtrails or whatever, and there are people who are wondering about geoengineering because, I mean, I'm not a meteorologist, but I seem to remember that Milton came from the west side of the Gulf. And usually hurricanes come across, they may go up the eastern seaboard, or they come over the peninsula and weaken, or they come into the Gulf, but usually they don't make sharp right turns and hit Venice. They usually go up the Gulf and they hit Mississippi, Alabama, and Texas more often, or the Panhandle. So, you know, this probably isn't your area of expertise, but what are your thoughts on that? Because who knows?
Yeah, so it's interesting. You know, I started in 2012, I started working in Southwest Florida. And I came down at the time I was living in Atlanta. So I wasn't super familiar with the directions of hurricanes at that point and what to expect. And, you know, the first really 5 years, there was not many storms. It was very, very quiet during that time frame. Then we had Irma, which was more of a paralleling. It ended up coming up through hitting Collier County. It was supposed to hit Lee County. It made a kind of shift over to 30 miles to the east and then came straight up. But then when you look at storms like Charlie and you look at storms like Ian, Milton now, right? They all had this directional, you know, twist, if you will, or shift so that they were coming more of a landfall than some of the storms that parallel. You know, and maybe Bob Harrigan's going to be here next, and he's a meteorologist, so it would be good to maybe ask him those similar questions. But my general experience just working in the industry is the storms that I've personally encountered, it is very possible for them to come and make that turn. And it seems like it's more and more frequent that is happening. I know one of the things that the National Weather Service will tell us is that when you look at the category also, because people will say it feels like we're getting more powerful storms more frequently now. Is that true? And they will tell you in the last 7 years, we have averaged one Category 4 or 5 storm every year in the past 7 years. And when you look back to the past 60 years, it used to be really that time frame was once every 7 years. So they're more frequent, right? And they're more powerful. So that much we know. Sir, did you have a question?
I do. Yeah, during evacuations, there's a lot of traffic. 75 is the way out for the county. Do you track and communicate where the traffic jams, or should I just use Google Map? Do you have anything else beyond Google Map to help us decide?
We really, you know, honestly, we do see the cameras on like our interstates here that are somewhat helpful, but we don't really have visibility out beyond the county, which is obviously where you're trying to go. And we refrain from directing people where to go, because if we tell the whole county to go one direction, right, now you've got more traffic heading one way. The one thing I will share is that our county, our area, Southwest Florida, is named the #1 hardest place to evacuate. Okay, so I hear what you're saying. It can be very challenging. And we are called the #1 hardest place to evacuate because of some of the reasons we talked about. We have this large evacuation area. We have a lot of elderly people who are hard to evacuate out of the area. We have one highway, right? All of these reasons. So the #2 hardest place to evacuate is the Tampa area, right? Tampa-St. Pete area. So personally, I send my family, like I mentioned, out on the other coast to go across, just because you go north, now you're competing with, and this particular storm was either going to hit, Pinellas, or it was going to hit us or Manatee, so it was that range. So they were calling for a mass evacuation, we were calling for a large-scale evacuation. So probably north for this storm, not the best idea. So either maybe traveling south and across Alligator Alley or going across the state. So kind of, if you pay attention to who else is calling for the evacuations, that can help maybe direct your path. Because if it's a big storm, maybe, for example, that's impacting Collier County, right, then north wouldn't be quite as bad. Good question. Yeah. Anyone else? You guys have some good questions. You had a question, ma'am? Go ahead. Yeah, so the question is do we have any good information on why the storm surge is more prevalent and bigger? And so I will point back because we have had some pretty massive storms, and we'll point back even to Katrina, right? So Katrina was in 2005. In 2005, so we're talking, 20 years ago, and they had 30 feet of storm surge on their coast, over in the Alabama coast. And so, you look at these storms, Superstorm Sandy, it was about 12 years ago. Like, there's a few of these storms that have had some really big storm surge. So it's happening more frequently, yes, but that caliber of a storm, Andrew, right? When you look at that hit in Miami all those decades ago in the 90s, it's not new that we have the larger storm surge. I think it's just the frequency of the storms occurring so that we're seeing it more frequent. I never thought that I would, in my career, be on the phone with the National Hurricane Center before a storm talking about 12 feet of storm surge in my community. I thought that was I was hoping it was a one and done down in Lee County. So, and yet, not 2 years later, we're having that same conversation. So, yes, ma'am, go ahead.
Could I ask one more question? How much does the Intracoastal Waterway absorb a little of the storm surge? It seems to me like it would absorb some of it.
Yeah, it helps a little bit that we have these kind of barrier islands and the space really between. But when you look at, again, let me go back to our, let's see where we're at. Here we go. With the power that those storms have, it's not going to be enough to necessarily keep that storm surge from pushing. So anywhere that you see, especially at the red, the orange, the yellow, those are the most vulnerable places. And the further down you go, like we talked about, it's more about elevation and the fact that the Gulf itself is very shallow. And we also don't have much of a continental shelf on our coastline. So if you've been out in the Gulf, beautiful, right? Go out there. But you can go pretty far, and you're about waist deep. You can wade out there pretty far. When you think about going into the water on the Atlantic side, you're underwater pretty quickly, right? That's a pretty steep drop off there. So it's that combination of the shallow Gulf, there's not a lot of continental shelf to catch that water or to dissipate it, and then our low elevation moving inland. Mangroves are a helpful deterrent to storm surge. If you've got some bodies of water to absorb that or kind of get in the way. Barrier islands themselves help, right? Although, we have people that live out there, so I would say they probably wouldn't agree. But so all of those things kind of factor together. At the end of the day, we choose to live in a very beautiful place in the country, right? Because we all want to be near the coast and we love the weather, right? But we just have to be aware that this is a potential. And the one good thing about hurricanes, again, I mentioned I'm from Chicago, right? So the Midwest, what do we have up there? Tornadoes, right? You don't get a lot of warning with tornadoes. Hurricanes, at least we know that they're coming. You have to try pretty hard not to know a hurricane is coming. So we urge you guys to just take those protective actions that you may need to keep yourself safe. Very good. You guys, thank you so very much. You've been a great audience. Appreciate it.